Regidrago VSTAR is one of the definitive best decks in the Pokemon Trading Card Game at the time of recording this video, with an astonishing 79 top 150 finishes in major regional and international championships in the month of November alone across all 3 age divisions. It's also won 3 regional championships, 2 international championships, and most likely would have won the 2024 World Championships if it weren't for a specific victory arm motion. Thanks to its insane versatility, oppressive design, and overwhelming popularity, Regidrago has truly become the deck to beat in the late Stellar Crown to mid Surging Sparks format. But what if I told you that Regidrago wasn't always this dominant? What if I told you that Regidrago wasn't even actually in the top 20 for meta decks for nearly 2 years, and that people thought it was one of the biggest flop decks in the history of the Pokemon Trading Card Game? This is the story of how a single expansion turned Regidrago VSTAR from a joke into the powerhouse deck that it is today. Before we get started, I will quickly ask to see if you're subscribed. I put a ton of effort into planning and making these videos, which can get tough sometimes due to me being a college student. Subscribing helps support me and my channel, and it allows me to make more videos like the ones you're currently watching. And if you want to help support my channel even further, consider becoming a member. With 3 different tiers to choose from, you'll get access to my videos early, get exclusive behind the scenes updates, you'll get creative inputs on new videos, and more. Every member will also be featured in the credits of every single one of my videos. Thank you so much for your support so far. Now let's get back to the video. Our story begins in November 2022 with the release of the Silver Tempest expansion. Silver Tempest introduced quite a few new decks, combos, and literally the most dominant deck in the history of the game. However, prior to the set's release, there was one deck that was being hyped as the next best Dragon-type deck, Regidrago VSTAR. I can remember reading about this card for the first time on PokeBeach like it was yesterday. Everyone thought that Regidrago might just take the cake as the absolute best deck in the game. In fact, many people were comparing it to the Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX era, which, if you don't know, was one of the most overpowered tag teams ever printed. Furthermore, there are at least a dozen different powerful Dragon-type Pokemon to choose from, like the brand new Dragonite, Giratina VSTAR, Dragonite VSTAR, Duraludon VMAX, and Hisuian Goodra VSTAR, just to name a few. There is also Garchomp V, Flygon V, Dragonite V, Flapple, Appleton, etc. There were so many. So, with so many options to choose from, plus a VSTAR power that could basically fuel the massive graveyard of potential attacking options, how could there possibly be anything wrong with this deck? You would actually be quite surprised on how many issues there were with early builds of this deck. There were a lot. One of the biggest and most notable problems for this deck was energy acceleration. Unfortunately for Regidrago, it's a Dragon-type Pokemon, which means that it has to accelerate 2 different energy types onto itself. Now, there were 2 major saving grace cards to accelerate extra grass energy onto your Regidrago Vs, those being Leafeon V and Gardenia's Vigor. However, there were some major downsides to both cards. Let's start with Leafeon V. Its literal only purpose in the deck was to use its Greening Cells ability, which was usually a once per game effect that attached to grass energy to Regidrago V and ended your turn. Now, if you were able to go first, this usually wasn't too bad of an issue. However, there were quite a few downsides to this engine, especially if you went second. First off, using Leafeon effectively essentially required you to attach an energy to your Regidrago turn 1. If you missed this, you basically have to waste another turn using Leafeon, or you are forced to use Gardenia's Vigor, which we'll get to in a minute. Another issue with Leafeon is that it essentially was a free 2 prize cards at any point in the game, and its ability could be shut down before you got a chance to use it if your opponent used Path to the Peak while they went first. On the other hand, you had Gardenia's Vigor, which had the upside of fully powering up a Regidrago in a single turn, but with a few incredibly detrimental drawbacks. First off, Gardenia can only attach grass energy from your hand and only to Pokemon on your bench. This requires you to have a Pokemon in the active spot with either no retreat cost, for example having an air balloon attached, or have a switching card that allowed you to use Regidrago right away, which was definitely easier said than done. And, I've saved the biggest drawback for last, Gardenia's Vigor just kinda sucks. It's not guaranteed to attach energy, and it only draws 2 cards, and it's your supporter for the turn, meaning that you don't get access to cards like Boss's Orders, Marnie, or Professor's Research. Keep in mind this is way before Prime Catcher existed, so there was very little chance of you being able to use Item Gust by using 2 Cross Switchers in addition to using gardenias. Now, I think it's important to note real quick that some Regidrago builds tried to use the Rillaboom engine to accelerate energy, but this led to quite a few other issues that dramatically slowed the deck down and made it reliant on a Stage 2, which kind of defeated the whole point of it being a turbo deck. Unfortunately for the Apex Dragon, energy acceleration wasn't the only problem that the deck ran into. Not only was the deck somewhat clunky and it could brick easily, it was also always forced to target your opponent's active Pokemon, unless you wanted to discard all your energy with Garchomp V, which was absolutely not worth it 90% of the time, with all the other V-Star and V-Max cards in the format at the time. This required the use of gusting cards almost every turn, because Regidrago struggled to one-hit KO most V-Max Pokemon in the format, even with the combination of Giratina V-Star and Choice Belt. Even Mew V-Max, who normally would get one-shotted by this combo, could easily slap down Oricorio onto the bench to tank the hit by 20 damage, similar to another nuisance in the current Surging Sparks format. Regidrago also shared one major weakness with every other deck in the Silver Tempest format: the mere existence of Rainbow Lugia V-Star. In fact, Lugia was essentially just a better Regidrago back then, because it was more self-sufficient, consistent, effective, oppressive, versatile, and you get the point. Lugia could instantly KO Pokemon VMAX with Amazing Rare Yveltal, snipe multiple targets with Amazing Rare Raikou, and even KO basic Pokemon V with just Lugia V-Star itself. The deck was so stupidly oppressive to the point where it ultimately suppressed ADP GX as the most hated deck in the history of the game to quite a few players. However, once Regidrago believers, myself included, realized that the quote-unquote turbo version of the list wasn't exactly the way to go, we turned to the Lord of Energy Acceleration himself, Arceus V-Star. Because Arceus was much easier to set up compared to Regidrago, as well as being more self-sufficient and ultimately more effective, it was pretty clear that the Lord of all Dragons would need to kneel before another to unlock its immense power. Can you guess what happened next? Players started casting Regidrago aside in the favor of the dragons that it once had full reign over. During the Crown Zenith and Scarlet and Violet base set formats, Arceus found more success with Giratina V-Star, Duraludon VMAX, and Hisuian Goodra V-Star directly, leaving the gimmicky Master of Dragons in a very awkward meta spot. As the Scarlet and Violet era rolled on, both Turbo Regidrago and Arceus Regidrago continued to drop in popularity, falling prey to other Turbo decks like Miraidon and Fusion Mew, and even decks like Meowscarada EX and Ancient Box. Was this the end of one of the coolest concepts for a Dragon-type Pokemon ever? Would Regidrago join its Draconic brethren in the failed Dragon-type Hype Deck Club? At the beginning of 2024, Regidrago was in the gutter, ranking 40th and 45th in play rate on Limitless TCG. While it managed to net a decent amount of success in the lower age divisions, including winning the North American International Championships in the Junior Division, it saw practically zero play despite the half-dozen new Dragon-type Pokemon it got access to. It seemed that nobody could find the perfect 60 to play, which normally would be a good thing, since variability causes opponents to second guess, but it actually did the exact opposite. Since there were so many options, testing to find the best combination of dragons to use became, well, pointless. Since both builds were already so far down in popularity, there was no use in experimenting with a deck that had ultimately been forgotten and cast aside by most players. Regidrago V-Star had officially hit rock bottom. Temporal forces came and went, and even the most dedicated soldiers were abandoning ship in favor of powerhouse decks like Charizard, Qianpao, and Ancient Box. Was this truly the end for one of the most interesting cards in modern Pokemon? Was Regidrago washed? All that changed on May 24th of 2024, when the Twilight Masquerade set was released outside of Japan. Suddenly, Regidrago was popping up everywhere, winning tournaments left, right, and center. It took huge events by storm, wiping opposing boards and quickly becoming the talk of the town. But how? What could one set possibly do to fix a deck that quite literally was a binder filler just a mere week prior? If you're a competitive player, you probably already know the answer, and you probably already knew the answer the moment you clicked on this video. And I really appreciate you sticking around so far, letting me kind of explain the history. Now it's time that we get into the good stuff, the stuff that you're all here for. Twilight Masquerade gave Regidrago V-Star the power to obliterate opponents, level cities, be known throughout the cosmos as the feared mad titan that it was meant to be. All thanks to 2 cards. But these 2 cards actually changed the entire face of the standard format, both in and out of Regidrago. These two cards were Dragapult EX, a heavy-hitting Stage 2 Dragon Pokemon EX, who also had the incredible ability to place 6 damage counters directly onto the opposing bench Pokemon in any way you like, just like its predecessor Dragapult VMAX, but stronger, which completely warped the way the game was played. Every single Stage 2 Reliant deck had to swap from playing better 60 HP basic pre-evolutions into less optimal 70 HP basics just to avoid getting KO'd by Dragapult. And since Dragapult placed damage counters, Manaphy wasn't able to block its damage. Only this Rabsca could, and it was an evolution, meaning it immediately was less viable. Dragapult solves one of Regidrago's biggest problems: lack of spread damage. Since most of Regidrago's viable, non-costly attackers were just short of taking KOs on Pokemon like Qianpao EX, Raging Bolt EX, and Miraidon EX, Dragapult essentially was the exact tool that Regidrago needed to KO 2 Pidgeys with 1 Dreepy. However, even Dragapult EX would pale in comparison to the true key that unlocked Regidrago's full potential. That card is Tealmask Ogerpon EX, the mascot of the set. Tealmask Ogerpon was released as part of a 4-card set of different Ogerpon mask forms, and while 3 of the 4 have seen quite a bit of success competitively, Tealmask would end up being leagues above the rest. So, to make things a bit easier, I'll be referring to Tealmask Ogerpon EX as just Ogerpon for the rest of the video, since none of the other forms have ever made an appearance in a Regidrago deck. Ogerpon EX was quite literally everything that Regidrago was missing: energy acceleration and an efficient draw engine, both of which were solved by Ogerpon's Teal Dance ability. This ability is pretty broken, as it allows you to attach up to 4 extra energy and draw 4 extra cards a turn if you wanted and under the right circumstances. This also made hand disruption cards like Iono and Unfair Stamp much less effective due to the fact that it drew extra cards. What was much more important was the energy acceleration part. Now, some of you might be curious on how the energy goes from your Ogerpons to your Regidragos. The strategy's saving grace came in the form of a forgotten card that desperately needed some love: Energy Switch, which was able to fully power up a Regidrago VSTAR by switching off energy on Ogerpons to allow Regidrago to consistently attack on turn 2. Oh, and Ogerpon was also able to one-shot a Charizard EX thanks to weakness, which is really helping the matchup spread here. And so, with all the Infinity Stones collected, Regidrago began its conquest against the very decks that had humiliated it for so long. Its crusade started off small, getting a few decent results at NAIC 2024, with one even breaking into the top 16, but this was just the tip of the iceberg. In between NAIC and World 2024, a mini-set dropped that once again changed the entire landscape of the game: Shrouded Fable. Although the set was smaller, there were 3 ridiculously overpowered cards that essentially broke the entire game. And, unsurprisingly, Regidrago was one of the biggest decks to benefit from 2 of these cards: Night Stretcher and, more notably, Kyurem. Dusknoir, the final overpowered card introduced, would prove to be quite a nuisance for Regidrago, and would make me known as the Dusknoir Twitter thread guy, apparently. But it surprisingly paled in comparison to Regidrago's higher level of dominance thanks to Kyurem. If you've seen my single prize video, which is very similar to this style of editing, if you want to continue watching more of these sorts of videos after watching this one, you'll remember that I considered Kyurem as one of the 4 gatekeeper cards in the standard format during the Shrouded Fable and Stellar Crown formats. While this isn't as big of a deal in the current Surging Sparks format, it's still noticeably powerful and is still totally unfair against Stage 2 decks. Regidrago now essentially had both a fully loaded Infinity Gauntlet and the Power Cosmic itself. Marvel comic fans will understand that one. With an absolutely stellar cast of different Dragon-type Pokemon to choose from for practically any matchup, Regidrago quickly looked like the favorite to become the world champion. Enter Worlds 2024, where Regidrago flooded the scene in dominating fashion. If you look on Limitless TCG for the top 150 Regidrago players in the Masters Division, you will find a whopping 35 entries, with 6 of them being in the top 16. Regidrago was the deck at the biggest and most prestigious event of the year, becoming practically universally hated by everyone watching at home, especially during day 2 of the event, where it was featured 6 times out of the 8 streamed matches for the day, with Top Cut being overrun by Dragos. In fact, Ian Robb was looking like the favorite to win the tournament, soundly defeating Fernando Cifuentes 2-0. The stars were finally lining up. Could Regidrago finally achieve a dream that just a few months ago felt impossible was the Apex Dragon finally about to make history. Ian Robb was given a match loss for making a hand gesture that looked awfully inappropriate, depending on who you asked. There were countless debates on Twitter about what his hand motion was meant to be, but it became pretty obvious that it wasn't supposed to be anything inappropriate and instead was supposed to be a celebratory roll of the dice motion. However, since he technically didn't sign the match slip yet, the Pokemon Company International's judges controversially decided to give Fernando the win. In just a few confusing, frustrating, and heartbreaking moments, Regidrago's one chance at achieving an impossible goal was now gone. Fernando went on to win the event with his Iron Thorns EX deck, which upset almost the entire player base, and Ian Robb ended up finishing 5th. Not all hope was lost, however. Even though our Draconic Overlord didn't win out in the Masters Division, it did become a world champion in the Seniors Division thanks to Evan Pavelski. Plus, since the finals match in the Masters Division was so boring, people instead focused on just how dominant Regidrago really was at the event. And it would continue that dominance going forward, cruising through multiple online tournaments, swarming both local events and regionals at unimaginable scales. Baltimore, Dortmund, Joinville, and Louisville all saw droves of Drago players literally jumping over each other and clawing for that symbolic championship title. They all fell short. But then, Regidrago hit the jackpot. Lille Regionals, 4 top 10 appearances, 1 regional title. Gdansk Regionals, 2 top 10 appearances, and another regional championship under its belt. LEIC, 5 top 10 appearances, and a mirror match in the finals, which it won. Surprise! Sacramento Regionals, 5 more top 10 appearances, and you get the point. Regidrago had become, to put it in college football terms, the Alabama or North Dakota State of the Pokemon TCG. Essentially, what I mean by this is that the deck essentially had elevated itself to an entirely different level of play, constantly ensuring that it would continue to perform at the highest level at any event it was present in. And because of this, literally everyone and their grandma started picking up the deck and playing it. In fact, part of the reason why going first in the meta at the time of recording this video is such a big deal is almost purely thanks to Regidrago VSTAR, due to the immense pressure that I can have as soon as Regidrago V evolves. Because of the much wider and more effective Dragon Pokemon available, more oppressive deck structure, and a solidly consistent draw engine in the form of Ogerpon, Regidrago has finally more than proved itself to be one of, if not the biggest comeback story in the history of the Pokemon Trading Card Game. After a year and a half of being subject to the torture of mediocrity, the Apex Dragon has cemented itself as one of the most successful decks in the game's history, and it's all thanks to a visit to the Masquerade. I hope you enjoyed this video. It took me a very long time and a lot of effort, but I'm pretty proud of this one. Let me know what you thought about Regidrago's rise to the top. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, also, Regidrago is pretty ridiculous in the expanded format.